The goal, of course, of a relationship is for the two beings to be able to motivate and stimulate each other to basically turn a perpetual wheel. And so, and with that wheel, they can create anything. But if that wheel is going in the opposite direction, then they start to degrade each other. So there is a natural yin yang process that goes on between these two elements, if you may. However, when that process comes out of an alignment, it's like even if I'm in a Bugatti and I'm flying down the freeway, if my tire is off balance in the back, I'm feeling that. And that's just destroying the whole ride. So I feel like that as human beings, massive beings with all these wheels, we have to kind of begin to designate how we're governing our energy and our relationships with each other. This then requires us to actually really understand energy from its elemental level. Let's say it's, I don't know, nowadays it's oriental level. Okay, so it's ancient oriental level, and this is sometimes as simple as fire, earth, wind, water. And for us to realize when, as water beings, many of the melanin dominant are actually water beings, like they call the Lao, the rivers, the snake, the movement, the dancing, the verbs, the tones, the spirituality, the flow. Dealing with fire beings, which is a totally different element, and then having to figure out where is, let's say, our pot. Where is the other element that is allowing us to not be completely exposed to benefit from whatever it is, the element that's trying to act upon us, but at the same time not degrade who we are. So just like if a pot is sitting on the stove, the fire's on underneath, and then the water is boiling, and this is now how we're going to get something cooked. But if you throw the water right on the fire, one of them are going to perish. This is relationships.
So do us this favor, because a lot of people are in here in this chat room right now who are being bombarded with this powerful, meaningful content. I want you to take us slowly. What are the different elements? When you said a fire person and a water person, I'm assuming there's an earth person and an air person. Can you give us a brief primer on what is a water person and how they manifest in your life? What is a fire person and how they would manifest in your life? Of course, I would assume this is via behavior, right? So walk us through and give us a basic primer of these different elemental people that come into your life.
You know, anytime a person is being initiated into the deep mysteries, they're taken through a trial by the elements. And so this means that we're still standing in front of technically the biggest thing, the things that make everything. So there's a grade to this. So let's try to walk up that grade kind of like this rather than like this.
Right.
So when we see what the elements really are, we notice just on a very simple level that I'm able to blow, which gives me the wind. I'm able to spit, which gives me the water. I'm able to do the har, and I can feel the fire. And then obviously I got the earth because I'm sitting in. And with that being said, what we learn is that the body is actually not just one element, even though the reality will, in its temperaments, want us to just try to be one element. I call that pigeonhole. It's like, you just be this. But what this primarily has to do with is it has to do with the composition of not only how your DNA is formulated, but really where you've been born. Because your DNA is formulated from what you're consuming in the territory that you're in. So if you come from a specific place, your ancestors come from a specific place, they're eating all of the elements and of course, breathing in all of the noble elements, etc., in that area. And this is formulating the construction of the DNA over time. So this formulation then, to try to simplify it, because this could be something as complex as CRISPR and editing DNA strings and all that, to something as simple as saying, well, what is the predominant ruling element, the totem of this particular person, so we know how to deal with them. And where this fire, earth, wind, water thing started being able to be applied to even, let's say, the races, if you may, of the planetary system. However, we find no races or nations that actually have the names in which they refer to themselves as. So it could be very tricky when I even say an African or when I say a Caucasian or a Native American. Now, all those terms are very loaded. Like it's like Mother Goose and Grimm, playing with the language, and it's really like. So that's like the disclaimer that when I say a certain race, I'm saying so that you can identify that in your space and time right now. So when we look at, let's say, for instance, our Earth people. Our Earth people would be more of our indigenous or our Native American. And as Earth as an element, and this is what was learned with the Platonic solid, is Earth slows things down. It makes things colder.
Right.
What a lot of people think. And it slows things down and it puts things into a form. So it takes rapid moving energy, i.e. fire, and then it slows it down and turns it into something that's steel, that's like a vessel. And so this is why Platonic solids, again, are important only from the aspect that they actually show the shapes that Earth actually uses to form and create the vessels that are here in this plane. So also there's a characteristic. There's literally an attitude, a temperament, a personality behind an element. All are really the elements, and the master is able to raise above the elements. So the temperament of Earth, again, is that okay, it doesn't really like changing. It actually confines the energy. Also, as a people, they don't feel like they own the earth. They feel like that they're the guardians and the custodians of the earth. There's a deep level of civilization because they're naturally more rooted. So there's things about earth anyway that apply to earth. And so when you learn the races that correspond to that energy, you say, aha, that is why they do what they do. Now, of course, to every element, there's a positive and there's a negative. This is in order to keep the poles oscillating. So, of course, when we go to, let's say, our Alkebulanians, then we have the water people. And as I mentioned before, lots of dancing, lots of shanking, lots of moving. And their instrumental aspects of dealing with the reality are always centered around things related to sexuality, tantra, kundalini, and that's in its original form. And then also ritual, spirituality, these kind of things, intuitive things. And then as we keep going forward, we find that our melanin recessive or our European is actually from fire, being themselves able to consume or break down complex things, even entire civilizations, and make them all alike. When fire burns things, it makes everything the same. It can actually go over boundaries or eliminate boundaries and does not respect boundaries. And then we have our earth people, or excuse me, our air people, which are our Orientals, who are very systematic and methodical, who really work with systems of breath early, and even our breathing traditions come from the ancient Orient. So also, I do want to say this because that's the primer on this, just to give you the gist of it. I would say that you, of course, have where then when the element turns into its distorted state, let's say it's negative, even though, you got to use these terms properly. So we'll just say distorted state. Let's say a distorted water is like a swamp. It doesn't flow. So snakes accumulate. There's basically a poison. This can happen, especially when the religion has been, or the spiritual subset has been heavily tampered with, and the being has been over-sexualized. Fire keeps warm, but when not checked, definitely clings on to things and burns everything, looks for more and more fuel, collapses boundaries in order to find more and more fuel to burn. So we see in these elements that the master comes into play, which is you, because when you realize all these elements are acting out on you, and what you have to be is you have to be the navigator that learns how to use these different fuels into your motivational system, if you may, to propel you to where you're going, or where you have your thing set to go.
So people know me for blending different disciplines. And just listening to you, right? I'm hearing the astrology, the fire, air, earth, water, but I'm also hearing communication styles, right? That you spoke of earlier, like what's your communication style, right? And
Yes.
what I do understand about, and then you can build on this. What I do understand about this, say take your communication styles. You have collaborative, competitive, cooperative, compromising, avoidant. And what they will say, what communication experts will say, is no one is monolithically just one of those. You kind of flow in and out of all of those.
Absolutely.
But you do have a predominant space that you find yourself in most of the time. Are you competitive or combative? Are you collaborative or compromising? Are you avoidant? And each one of these styles have some type of effect or result when used. So I'm listening to your breakdown, a fire person versus a water person, and I saw how you broke that down. You said Africa is like water, right? Dancing and movement and fluidity, right?
Yes.
Then you use the Orient to explain air, logical. But what's interesting is and I'm piecing the pieces together, listening to the piece that you've brought to the table. When we study feng shui, the term itself means water and air, or air and water. Why? Because air and water both have currents and move the same way, right?